Good morning. Not that kind of Christian here. Friday, the 2nd of February, and I'm going to continue in a moment with my novella, The Sash My Father Wore. But I want to make a big shout out to somebody I have been watching on YouTube who's said a tremendous amount of things about gender and transgender and things like that are just absolutely amazing. I'm going to give a shout out for her channel. She's Jessie Gender. Look up Jessie Gender, Jessie with a J, and look at her video on the science of gender, which is, like other people I've been watching here, a massive antidote to right-wing Christian bigots, especially in America, like a guy called Matt Walsh. There's a particularly good bit in her video where she talks about the one that, the anti-trans brigade and whatever are always all about. They're coming for your kids. They're coming for your kids in school. So, shout out to Jessie Gender there. You're amazing. It's a 4-hour video, so I'm going to take that one a bit at a time, eh? Right, beginning now then, from The Sash My Father Wore, Chapter 9, and this is called The Letter. Mum was banned from the psychiatric ward of Walsall General. The kind nurse came over to me immediately she'd been escorted out. He was reassuring. Speaking softly with me, he swept up the glass shards from the broken IV bottle while blotting the fluid, repositioning the drip stand, then carefully taking out the IV in my right arm. He also cleaned the wound the drip had left as it tore from my arm, while I flailed wildly as Mum read Bible verses invoking her God. Shortly he was done. The drip was replaced, my chart updated, my bedclothes rearranged, and having taken my pulse, blood pressure, checked my respiration rate, which had now returned to normal, along with my heart rate, Chris, he told me his name, left me to get on with other tasks on the ward. Settling back under my covers, I felt a warm sense of security. I was glad Chris was here with me. I began to identify with him as my caregiver. Next morning, I learned from Chris that Mum was complaining to the hospital management about her not being able to visit me or even see me. Dad said she was furious and said Mother said this was a violation of her parental rights under British law. Seated in the same chair, a dour and stern-looking Dad had taken time off from universal shafting to visit me. He was then booked in to speak with the hospital manager. He made it clear that Mum needed to see me, to pray with me, to read the Bible with me, and I was clearly possessed by one or several demons which were dragging me into the pit of hell with them. Every second I was being kept from prayer as the direct means of grace. Putting his coat on to leave as the visitor bell sounded, Dad said he had spoken to the Anglican hospital chaplain, who had said to him that this was a medical and psychological matter. While obviously as a Christian chaplain he could give advice on matters of faith, on things spiritual, He had no right to intervene in the clerical or therapeutic matters surrounding my case. Dad did add that he promised to pray for me. Even so, he left my bedside angry that Mum was being denied access to his son. He was very specific that I was his son. His son, I thought about that as he walked away between the white-painted bed frames. I was of him as Adam was of God. Although God had fashioned man from the earth and then breathed his life into that first him, Dad was not God. Dad always claimed that even woman was still of us men. He pointed to where God had made woman out of man's spare rib and said that she was even named woman because she had come from man. She drew all that she was, all that she would ever be, from God, but through man. Dad said I was his son because I came from his seed. I instantly understood now that I meant nothing. I would have no son or daughter, and they would never come from me. I was a dead end. I had no potency. I had no masculinity. And worst of all, I had this sinful curse inside me. I wanted to hurt myself again. But thinking of Chris and how he'd cared for me, I didn't. Instead, I put my hands outside the bed covers and tried to change my thoughts. Once again, just for a moment at least, I felt peaceful. It had been exactly a week since Dad's last visit. I was by then out of bed and had not been given my clothing back. I wore pyjamas. Mum would leave them at reception and collect other items to be washed as well. I was just finishing breakfast when Chris brought me over a brown paper carrier bag with what I assumed was a change of clothing, underwear, a white vest, and I could see a new dressing gown. As he handed me the thick brown carrier, I noticed it bore the Marks and Spencer's branding. It was new, and it appeared that Mum had purchased some of the items at Marks in the High Street. I always felt special when Mum took me there to shop. They had a wooden escalator. All the male shop assistants wore jackets and ties. The shop seemed to stock pretty much everything. When they rang up the transaction, I can remember the cash register bell rang while I heard the change rattle as the assistant slammed the till shut. I took the bag from Chris, putting down my plastic cutlery on my plate. As he passed it to me, he said again, softly, with a note of cheeriness in his deep voice, "Your mum said to tell you that she's put an airmail letter from your brother Noel in there. She wanted me to add that she'd opened it and to say that your dad had spoken to Noel on the phone. She said your dad had to book the call in advance, but after what she called your incident, she felt they needed to tell your brother as soon as possible. She said that Dad could not speak long as the call cost, in her words, an arm and a leg, but she wanted me to assure you that now Noel and everybody at the mission were praying for you." And I'll end that part from chapter 9 there. Once again, copyright Anthony E.C. Linford, Great Yarmouth, 2nd of February 2024.